Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the Operations Coordinator for CFAL York. I would like to officially open the 17th session of the Climate Change Emergencies and Cultural Heritage Speaker Series, which is being presented in partnership with Heritage Ottawa and World Heritage Catalysis. I would like to begin today's session with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Toronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event and our participants may be joining from various locations, I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speakers, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Kourosh Attarian. Dr. Kourosh Attarian is an associate professor of architecture at the Jundi Shapur University of Technology and is also a postdoctoral fellow at York University. In 2018, Dr. Attarian became the Vice Chancellor of the Jundi Shapur Research Institute at the Jundi Shapur University of Technology. And Dr. Attarian's research focuses on cultural history and architectural engineering. His research has been published in numerous leading journals on architecture, cultural heritage, and sustainability, and has been published in several books. Dr. Attarian is also a reviewer for several journals, including the Journal of Building Engineering, the Journal of Asian Architecture and Building Engineering, and the Journal of Cultural Heritage Management and Sustainable Development, among many others. Dr. Attarian, thank you very much for moderating today's session. The floor is yours. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Dr. Attarian.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Francesco, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Kourosh, and I will be the moderator of the 17th session of Climate Change Emergencies and Cultural Heritage Speaker Series. In this session, we are honored to host our speakers, Dr. Angela Lombardi and Dr. Saadet Toker-Beeson, who will speak on enhancing disaster resilience on Texas Gulf Coast, a framework for historic places of worship and their communities. To give a little bit introduction about our speakers, Dr. Angela Lombardi is an associate professor of architecture with a focus on history preservation. Dr. Lombardi, a native of Italy, and she's an expert in documentation and conservation of built heritage and its resilience. She's research endeavors include an advanced study of cultural landscape of San Antonio, Texas, applying advanced documentation technologies at the scale of building the city and the territory, including climate change vulnerability assessment. Since 2021, she's involved in structural analysis of 12th century indigenous populous settlement of Cliff Palos, Mesa Verde. She is one of the grant recipients of Sacred Places Sacred Places Heritage Resilience Network, a plan to increase disaster resilience in Texas Gulf Coast region, working through faith-based organization in local communities, awarded from Richard H. Drell's Foundation, Natural Preservation Award in 2023. Internationally, Dr. Lombardi's work has included projects of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Lebanon, Iraq, Lima, Peru, and more recently in Marv Archaeological Park, Turkmenistan. She is the co-editor of book Lima, the Historic Center Analysis and its Restoration, which paved the way the numerous rehabilitation initiatives in the Historic Center of Lima in 2012. And the book, The History Meets Science Between Abruzzo and Texas in 2019. And our next speaker, the co-speaker, Dr. Saadet Toker-Beeson. She is an Associate Dean for Community Engagement, Interim Director of School of Architecture and Planning, University of Texas, San Antonio. After her graduation, Dr. Beeson worked as a visiting researcher in Civil and Architectural Engineering Department, University of Bath, England. In 2004, she was assigned to Department of Architecture, Süleyman Demirel University, if I say it right, Sparta, Turkey. From 2008-2009, she worked as a postdoctoral research fellow in Civil and Architectural Engineering Department of University of Wyoming. After she completed her research there, she continued her research and teaching in Suleiman Demirel University until 2009. She served there as an associate professor and taught several classes within her field of interest and qualifications, such as advanced structural systems, earthquake resilience building design, and architectural design. She also served as many administrative positions and had active role in several communities. Currently, she is a dean for community engagement and interim director of the School of Architecture Planning at University of Texas at San Antonio. Her fields of interest are evaluation of existing structures, architectural review in structural design, masonry structures, historic buildings, architectural and structural solutions for earthquake resistance building design. Thank you, Dr. Lombardi and Dr. Beeson. Following the session, we will have the moderating the Q&A section. So should any of our participants have any question, please post them into Q&A section. We will reading them through. Dr. Lombardi, Dr. Beeson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kurush. I think we're going to share our screen and start our presentation. Thank you for hosting us here. We're very excited to be here and to share our research with you. Like Dr. Atarian said, please share your questions, so we will do our best to answer all of those. This is regarding our research to enhance disaster resilience of the Texas Gulf Coast. The name of it is a framework for places of worship and their communities. How we started this, if we can go on, yes. How we started this is we started it as a big team. Actually, you're seeing only some members of the team here, but this was a big project for us. And it happened because of the disasters that Texas has faced in the recent decade. So in the recent decade, disasters that the Texas encountered costed like more than $1 billion, and more than the economic result of it, actually, it affected people's lives. So the historic places, the sacred places, were among the very affected, severely affected group of buildings. So we wanted to carry out our research on the historic structures of temple buildings. So we had a list of collaborators here that made this possible, that made this research possible. Galveston Historic Foundation, Victoria Preservation, Preservation Houston, America Institute of Architects, National Trust Research and Policy Lab, National Trust Regional Office in Houston, and Preservation Texas. With this project that went on for a few years, we received the award from National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Richard Dryhouse National Preservation Award. We were honored with that. And now I'm going to give you the case studies. These are the most affected counties in Texas that were affected by Hurricanes Harvey and Maria, actually. We selected 9 of these. Historic buildings, sacred buildings, actually, and they're not only churches, but there are 2 synagogues among them as well. So we detailed we ran a detailed study about the general characteristics of these structures, and then figured out what may go wrong, and then we went on from there. So one of the case studies that I'm going to talk about in this, that we are going to talk about in this presentation, is Knesset Israel Synagogue in Baytown, around Houston area. It was built in the 1930s by the Russian Jewish immigrants, and it is still in service, actually, but it was really damaged by Hurricane Ike in 2008. So what we heard from the people here when they're working in there is that these disasters have happened very frequently, started to happen very frequently. Before it was every 10 years, and now it is every couple years. We're having the same issue with the hurricanes and the flood that is following them. It was, again, significantly damaged by Harvey, and then we worked on those damages as well. And this is the second one in Galveston. This is the Reedy Chapel. It was built in 1886. It is the oldest African Methodist Episcopal Church in Texas. So all of these buildings that we selected has a historic significance. It was damaged in 1885, And then it was significantly damaged in the 1900 by the Galveston hurricane. It was still among the deadliest hurricanes in history. And then damaged by at least 5 additional hurricanes over the 20th century. Once again, it is still in service, but it has some serious issues. What we did for these buildings is that, once again, we are going to talk about only these 2, but we did it for 9 of the structures. We did the vulnerability assessment for heritage buildings, and then we created a holistic assessment of his heritage sites to be used by stakeholders. This includes non-technical people as well, so it is actually very user-friendly. And then we engaged technology for historic buildings and its resilience in response to climate change. And then we created the recommendations to enhance resilience, because apparently these things will keep happening and these structures are the most vulnerable. And then we created a resilience roadmap toolkit to guide disaster planning and enhance the capacity of places to prepare and to recover. In the first part, we're going to talk about the climate change and impact, and then we will talk about the development of a framework. And the second part, we're going to talk about the rapid visual vulnerability assessment. This is a tool for professionals. And then I will also give you the details about the structural analysis in this vulnerability assessment. And then Dr. Lombardi will take over, and then she will talk about the community and our partners, and then she will talk about the resilience performance indicators, treatment and strategies, and the roadmap to resilience. So Texas Gulf Coast is very vulnerable for these hurricanes. And like I said, it has been happening less frequently before, but with the climate change, these disasters have been more frequent in the recent years. And they are creating a lot of economical damage. They're costing lives, and they are also disturbing the community by taking away the most important structures of our lifetimes. And now we are looking at the risk index, which is a combination of expected annual loss, social vulnerability, and community resilience. So if we increase the community resilience, we will be able to decrease the risk index due to these disasters. So that's what we are hoping to do with this study. This is a list of chronological order of the historic storms in the Texas Gulf Coast. It starts in the 1850s, the hurricane of 1854, and then it goes all the way to Hurricane Harvey here. And then you see how more frequent it gets over the last few years. And these are the effects of the images that you see here are the effects of the storms that you see in Texas Gulf Coast. For example, the third one shows us the retaining wall, the seawall that people of Galveston bounced back from the 1900 Great Hurricane. So that Great Wall is, it is actually our Great Wall. That seawall is miles long, and it is like 20 feet tall. So it goes all around the coast. So now we're going to look at the vulnerability and resilience. We try to look at these things together because we cannot improve the resiliency without understanding why we are vulnerable. Vulnerability is the degree to which a system or a structure is susceptible to damage or unable to cope with it due to hazards or adverse effects of climate change, including variability and extremes. So it is inversely related to resilience. And for the resilience, when we look at it, it is the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change. So these are going to be always in our lives, and we will try to decrease the vulnerability by increasing the resilience of our structures. So first, we look at the buildings, the capacity of a structure to absorb the external stresses, retain function, and reduce industrial risk, and help vulnerable people, organizations, and the systems. And when we look at the society, we're going to look at the ability of groups of communities to cope with external stresses. So the risk will be determined by the hazard and the exposure and the vulnerability. And these are all exponential. They're all exponentially increasing the risk. Now, for the heritage resilience, we need to look at both the social and the physical aspects of historic built environment and its use in the present and over time. Historic structures are our link from our past to our future and to our current time as well. And then we need to look at the resilience of buildings and the heritage sites in general. So the ability to maintain or restore functionality after the damaging events. And then we are going to look at these are the tangible aspects, and we have the intangible aspects, such as the resilience of communities, which is the ability to adapt to changing conditions and prepare for, withstand, and rapidly recover from destruction. In order to enhance the heritage resilience, we have to look at these things, but there is no starting point for this. We have to analyze the risks and anticipate the disasters. We need to understand the needs of the community and the context of the building, and then we need to adopt the strategies. And we have to integrate everything with the existing disaster plans and aim for flexibility. So preparedness and response, and then after the disaster happens, we have the recovery, and then we will start again with the mitigation, preparedness, and response. To enhance the heritage resilience, we have some treatments and strategies. These are the recommendations related to the concerns of practicality, resilience enhancement, and the historic character. So each intervention must be evaluated with these three concerns in mind, because it is going to be unique to every building and every community that it serves at. Some may be easy to implement, and others may require concessions, but it has to be developed individually. We need to think about the community and the systems and the flexibility while we are enhancing the heritage resilience. To ensure the continuity of the traditions, we have to look at the construction techniques and the intangible traditions together. So actually, I'm going to leave it to Dr. Lombardi. I think she can, I think she should take on here and onwards.
Thank you. So our work started with a sort of technical approach. So how can we quantify the disaster resilience of historic houses or workshops? So the first thing that we thought is, let's look at the existing tools that are, sorry, we have something that doesn't work. Okay, let's look at the existing tools that already exist to understand what are the vulnerability of the site, the vulnerability of the area in general, and also how professionals currently can assess building condition and assess the vulnerability of the buildings, and in particular historic buildings. So we implemented a little research on the type of maps that are available to understand what is the vulnerability of the area. And and of course, we have FEMA that has worked at a federal level to create an incredible database that provide all type of flood map all over the country. And this flood map can actually be used by the communities to understand the risk associated with specific areas. And we have both dynamic and static map. Also, FEMA has issued a national flood insurance program where 50 insurance company can support residents that live in specific flooding areas, like, for example, Houston, that is one of our area of concern, and where we have some case studies too, that has experienced 500-year flood events multiple times since 1979. Also, as existing tools, we have coastal storm surge maps implemented by NOAA that actually simulate storm surge with the category subdividing hurricanes in 5 categories. And also we have sea level rise maps also implemented by NOAA. All these maps are extremely useful for users and worked as a baseline for our research. Another baseline for our research was the different type of form that were already created and implemented to understand the condition, building condition, eventually a specific tailored to climate vulnerability assessment. So we have a building form that was developed by the National Council for Preservation Education and Training that is located in Nacogdoches, Louisiana, and is actually a National Park Service office. So in this form, we have numerous information that here are listed, like basic information about a specific building, property description, general flood data, and general evaluation about the structural soundness of the building. Also, this is a very synthetic form that also include potential further action. And the form, however, is the one that you see here in this page. So it's a one-page form, a sort of scratching up the surface of the problem. Also, another form that is valid for Texas, not for all the US like the previous one, is the THC Historic Resource Survey form. And in this case, is specific tailored to historic buildings that are eventually included in the National Register of Historic Places, and it focuses more on architectural description and structural detail and historic information, but there is no concern about building condition and building vulnerability. So we decided, hey, this is our starting point. Let's create a tool, a practical tool that could be used by professionals to understand in a rapid way the vulnerability of a specific structure. So on a side note, we worked on an individual building, but this method could be extended also to larger sites. So in order to understand the vulnerability of a building or a site, there are various variables. The first variable is, as said, to understand what are the natural disasters the area is prone. It's very basic, but we included in our form this information. Then we have a second aspect that I'm going to talk about right now, that is a building assessment form that identify the condition of the different building assemblies of the structure, and the condition is identified by 5 categories of condition, from excellent to critical. This is our starting point to create a vulnerability assessment, assess the condition of the different building assemblies. And I'm going to explain you in a little bit all the process. Another element that is, or another variable of the vulnerability, is the analysis of the soil that we specifically implemented for all the buildings. And Saadet actually worked on a mathematical model, the finite element analysis, that identify the behaviors of the building under specific hydrostatic loads associated with hurricanes. All these help to identify the vulnerability of the building or of the site with these vulnerability assessment score that include both external factor and intrinsic factor. Let's see how. So we started, as I said, with the condition assessment of the building, and it's a rapid visual assessment. So we visited the site and we identified the different building issue. However, this assessment is rigorously organized, subdividing the building into different separated building assemblies, like, for example, foundations, like everything that is on the top of the foundation, so the superstructure, either the enclosure, the interior, and also identifying the various mechanical system services, and also site and landscape environment. Up to now, nothing new. This is a sort of traditional way in which the conditions were described in 5 categories, specifically, again, I repeat, associated with each different building assemblies. Why I focus on this aspect of the building assemblies? Because once we have a natural disaster that is, in specific case of Texas, hurricane or flood, each building assembly has a different type of vulnerability. So, for example, let's take a roof. In case of a storm, the roof is a very vulnerable element, is very highly exposed. So what we did, we created a sort of multiplier that can be applied to each building assembly. The multiply is very high, in case the exposure is high. And also the multiplier is high in case the specific building has that specific structural component that is in bad condition. So we have this score that can have, or this multiplier that has a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 10, that describe the vulnerability of each individual building assessment. The total number, or the total sum of the different scores of the building, of each individual building assembly, give us a sort of, or what we call, the vulnerability score of the building. So we moved, therefore, with this method from a basic or traditional condition assessment to identify a vulnerability score for individual building assembly, and therefore for all the building. So in this case, what we can say that if we have a very high number, like in the case of the Knesset synagogue, like 271 points resulted in our vulnerability assessment, we have a very or a lower resilience. If we have a very low number, we have the building that already has a high resilience. And so this is a very, I would say, powerful tool, because we can apply the different resilience treatment and strategies to each individual component, working analytically like this to increase to decrease the number, therefore to increase the resilience. So this is one of the steps of our project that I think is very successful and can be largely utilized And together with the other information about the other vulnerability components, really create a holistic, effective tool. So the other component is the soil analysis. So we analyzed for each building and site the type of soil, and we can have different type of soil, and soil really contribute to the vulnerability of the structure. So for example, in this based on its characteristic, its moisture content, particle size distribution, and shear strengths. So, for example, in the case of the Knesset synagogue, we have the presence of a soil that is a clay sand. So clay has a potential of swelling. Luckily, in this case, it's only 25%, so we have a relatively low potential of swelling. But however, the strength of the soil may decrease if soaked for a prolonged amount of time, showing that is relatively vulnerable to flood. And so we provided, therefore, some type of resilience treatment strategies for this type of soil. Instead, Reedy Chapel has a different type of soil in which we have primarily medium and fine sand. We are on a site very close to the coast, and in this case we have very low cohesion, but on the other side the soil does not swell, so therefore it's somehow pretty stable in case of flooding. However, we created specific resilience treatment strategies for this type of soil that is prone to erosion, therefore all type of strategies that prevent erosion. So now I leave the floor to Saadet again, that will tell us a little more on how we move to the mathematical model and how it really contributed to understand the behavior of the buildings under hurricane, so wind and flood load.
Thanks, Angela. So for the finite element analysis, again, I'm going to talk about only these two structures. Here's the thing: when you look at a historical structure, you have to make sure that the structure is sound. Because if the building is not structurally sound, then whatever you do on top of it is not going to be permanent, or it's not going to have a long lifetime. Therefore, we wanted to look at the things with the finite element analysis, but we used the linear analysis first. If we discovered like very serious problems, then we would be doing a more detailed structural analysis. But I believe in the linear assessment a lot to tell us what is wrong, what may go wrong with the structure. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the Binai Israel. We use SAP 2000. For all of our structures, and then we use the frame elements, shell elements, depending on the building. So for example, for Knesset building, we use the shell elements because it's masonry structure. For the other one, we used frame elements. I'm going to talk about it when we come to that. So this is the Binai Israel. And if you look at the bar at the bottom of it, you're going to see where it gets critical. So based on this, the Binai Israel, it is going to show us the dark blues and the purples. Those are the two extremes of it. And by the way, how we decided what is going to be vulnerable, we looked at the literature to determine what the material properties are. Because you have to give some material properties, you have to tell what their strength is, and then we analyze these under wind loads. So we looked at the category 5 wind loads, and then we analyze the structure based on that. So of course, the exposure of the building to wind was important. The soil conditions were important. The openings on those walls were important. And with the finite element analysis, we first did the modeling of it, and then we ran the simulations for it. And we are going to show you those images as well. So in this one, you see that there are not many problems with the long walls, but on the short walls, we are having some issues, the ones with the blue. And then this is showing us what happens when there's an active load on it, like when the wind hits, here's what happens with the walls. And as you can see, both the transverse walls are under great stress in here. And then in both images, we're going to see that. And then this is what the deformed shape looks like under the dynamic loads. These are the maximum stress distributions. As you can see, the color red is dominant all over the structure. So this is what's going to happen. Of course, this is exaggerated. If it did this kind of a movement, it would fall, definitely. But this is exaggerated, and this is to show us what the most vulnerable parts are going to be in the structure. So this is the Reedy Chapel. We used the frame elements for this because the structure was basically that, frames. This shows us the flood analysis, like when the water hits it and then it goes up to a certain level, and how the structure is going to be stressed based on this. So as you can see, again, it's the magenta and the blue colors that we need to be looking at. And then, as you can see here, once again, the transverse walls are in great danger in this one for the wind, when the wind hits in this direction and then in the other direction. So depending on the direction of the wind, the stress values are changing. This is how the deformed shape works. So you see there will be some buckling events at the top of the roof. So that is showing us the vulnerability of it. And then these are the other deformed shapes and the maximum stress distributions. The stress distributions are all over the main walls. And then once again, we see how the wind is affecting the structure. So as you can see, it is actually basic structural behavior. If you push it from the transverse side, it is going to expand on the long side. And if you push it on the long side, it's going to expand on the transverse sides. All right, I'll leave it to Angela again.
So thank you, Saadet. Well, very exciting. So we see, we were really able to see how the building behavior behaves under stress. And definitely we had some answers about the vulnerability of the site and the building and the site. And at this point, we really needed to have some type of connection with the community. And ask the community what were their issue. And so we organized two community engagement events that had a knowledge cafe format. Knowledge cafe is a specific format in which there is a sort of Socratic method that is implemented with community stakeholders. There are some questions that are asked, and we listen to what were the issue of the individual communities associated with the historic houses of worship. Because as Saadet mentioned before, historic houses of worship are not only buildings, but they are hub for the community, and the community relies on them. So what we learn from the first Knowledge Cafe is that basically the risk that they feared was not only associated with weather and climate event, but they added an additional vulnerability that is associated with historic and economic and social inequality. So some of these community, like the case of Reedy Chapel, is very low income, and therefore they were really frightened by the consequences of whatever type of climate change associated disaster. The other, therefore, something came out that was not only something that was a technical aspect, but also was a human component that somehow the research had to had to address. Also, another aspect was the fear of losing not only the building, but also the movable heritage associated with the building, like music instruments and other artifacts that were inside the building itself. The fear of having issues in accessing to resources that wealthier congregation and the domination had was really the fear of these most vulnerable economic communities, because they said, well, you know, wealthier congregation are able to recover faster. However, what we discovered in these public events was also that there was already a network in place that was somehow informal. The second Knowledge Cafe really moved even forward, because once the fear of, let's say, inadequate funds was somehow addressed by us, they actually started to ask us specific documents that could create or improve the communication between the faith-based organization groups and the government emergency response managers. So what are the opportunities that the state, the county, and also the federal government provide to historic houses of worship to improve or increase or enhance the specific building resilience? Also, the stakeholder of these sacred places somehow didn't really have a terminology to deal with the institutions. So these were the findings associated with the Knowledge Cafe, and these findings are addressed in our website that I will share with you the link at the end of this presentation, in which there is a specific area where we address all the potential guidelines and potential tools to have access to funds and to create a direct connection with the county, with the state, and with federal support. Another, let's say, aspect that we implemented in the research that is associated with connection with community is a stakeholder survey in which we asked what was the role played by historic houses of worship in case of post-disaster, and how they were addressing the building maintenance, how they were addressing a building maintenance paradigm for these historic houses of worship. What we discovered is that the historic houses of worship really played an important role in post-disaster for food distribution, water distribution, and provide also shelter eventually to the community. Therefore, to have the building that it was that is in condition to provide this support is extremely important. And also another aspect associated with the building maintenance paradigm that emerged is that there was a need for standard guidelines that could help them out to understand what were the step-by-step good practices for building maintenance. So all these data goes and converge in a tool that is called resilience performance, that is called, so first of all, a tool that is called resilience performance indicators. This resilience performance indicator is a tool that can be used by stakeholders in which they can develop an awareness of the performance of the building and the vulnerability of the building to natural disaster, looking not only at the building conditions like we did in the vulnerability assessment, but look holistically what are the performance indicator of the building and the site, looking therefore at the infrastructure, at the environment, and also at the organization of the stakeholder themselves. So concerning the infrastructure, we assessed how the building relied on infrastructure, so the grid dependence, and also looking at the different components of infrastructure: energy, water, stormwater, wastewater, and communication. Also, some historical data needed to be gathered in order to assess what was, let's say, the historical vulnerability of this infrastructure associated with the building, specific buildings. And so we looked at all these infrastructure, and case by case, we had a different percentage showing, therefore, the resilience performance indicator associated with each building. Also, we looked at the environment, the land use, the emergency services, the site characteristics, in order to understand and assess the site location with regards to the surrounding hazard, the proximity to emergency services, and others. Lastly, we looked at the organization. So how the historic houses of worship were organized for preparedness, what type of resources had to deal with emergency response, and this involved analysis of risk management, looking at the economic conditions and experience. So all these tools are actually a tool that a stakeholder of historic houses of worship can feel by itself to understand what are the vulnerability and what are actually instead the resilience of its own houses of worship. And so we had finally the final assessment. So this is also on the website, and it is, I think, a very easy tool for stakeholders to understand what are the vulnerability of I would say, any type of no-profit organization or any type of organization that support the community. So at this point, the resilience performance indicator are basically the ones that lead to identify resilience treatment strategies that at this point do not involve only specifically the building, but also the site, looking at it holistically, and the movable heritage that was one of the concerns of the community. So the resilience treatment and strategies are organized in different type of categories associated with life safety issues, associated with resilience of the building systems, associated with the resilience against water intrusion and wind damage, and also post-disaster recovery. Concerning the building, we can see that again, we go back to the original building assemblies that I was mentioning at the beginning. Looking at the site are all the elements that were analyzed in the resilience resilience performance indicators, and looking at the movable heritage, we also introduced some elements and how these can be addressed in case of natural disasters. And so for each of the case study, we have addressed some of these concerns. And what is important is that there is also a sort of assessment in order to understand what are the elements that are substantial in the vulnerability improvement, and what are the elements instead that do not really impact so drastically the improvement or vulnerability or the resilience, right? And so if you look at the website where we have the section of resilience treatment and strategies, this is a practical, let's say, guideline, not only valid for historic houses of worship, but also, I would say, for every building that has some type of association with the community. It's very important what we learn from the RPI to continue to have a continued assessment of the building, so to look at the maintenance cycles. Therefore, the building maintenance paradigm is an essential component toward the preventive conservation of the building that is, let's say, a really strong tool for enhancing the resilience. So after that, and I want to conclude with that, we generated a roadmap for the community resilience that include all the aspects that that we have presented today with the resilience and treatment and strategies that can help the faith-based organization to enhance their resilience and to be less physical and psychologically vulnerable to natural disaster. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Lombardi and Dr. Beeson. It was an amazing presentation, especially your point of view in assessing tangible and intangible documentation and also structural analysis. Let's see what we have in Q&A section without further ado. Okay, so there's a question by Mahmoud that thank you very much for your great presentation regarding the assessment. Does your research cover the interior settings and ornamentation of such sacred structures? I think that maybe they're thinking about maybe the internal components such as historical events, as you know.
Can I, yes, so I can answer. At the beginning, we have to say that we were somehow naive because all the buildings that we analyzed didn't really have precious decorative elements at level of surface, like painted stucco. So at the beginning in the vulnerability assessment form, we did not consider that. And well, the community helped us, because when the community started to talk about movable heritage, we started, of course, to analyze also this aspect, and that included precious elements or decorative elements within the building. So, for example, we have in some of the churches some stained glass in Galveston, very precious stained glass for 19th century, and this aspect has been addressed in the vulnerability assessment in one of the sections, and also in the resilience treatment and strategies. There are specific considerations for this aspect. Yes. Thank you. I mean, this is a very interesting question, because at the beginning we really were looking at, like technical standpoint, and then, the community helped us not to lose our focus.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. So the next one, how about First Nations? Do they have records of disaster, and especially their traditional responses? There's another one by Frank. And says that at the present, I wonder about the history, sacred places of indigenous people. I think maybe
well, this is very
this
interesting.
yes.
Yes, so our research is somehow limited, because as Saadet mentioned at the beginning, we had to include all structure that were already designated. So for example, we really looked for a mosque. So there is a huge Islamic community, especially in the Houston area. However, unfortunately, there were no mosque that was on the National Register of Historic Places. And so at the beginning, we were again a little bit frustrated, because the research could not include all the aspects of, community associated with worship. So we identified a sort of diverse community, different type of religion that are associated with these historic buildings, but not all of them. However, this doesn't mean that we did not take this into consideration. So sometimes, so the limitation of the study, did not allow us to look at also communities that are worshipping in places that are newer, or also indigenous communities that have that eventually do not really have a physical building to rely on, or eventually have structures that are very limited in size and are not designated as historic. So and there is not specific work or there is no specific case studies, but I think that if we look at the material, this could be easily applied to a large variety of situations.
Thank you very much. And I guess you answered this next one.
And,
okay.
And also a last note, there was a big controversial when we started the project, because there were some communities that were highly impacted by religious community, highly impacted by the hurricane in Rockford, for example, and they had no designation, and therefore they had no support, also no economic support for the damage that the building received. And we thought that anyway, our tool could be also help this type of communities.
Well, we have another one that says by payment. Throughout the history, most of the sacred places located in the safer locations in the cities because of their past experience. I mean, past experience of disasters. So after your assessments over this subject, is there any of sacred places that you think that should be replaced for the be secure from the next disastrous phenomena, such as floods, storms? And if you say yes, what do you think about implementing these measures to the communities?
I'm not sure I have understood the question. Well, this is really based on the community preference. So if you ask really, and Saadet, I'm taking the floor completely. So if you have something to add, but for example, Reedy Chapel in Galveston, and is an ancient community, one of the first African-American churches in the city. And I don't think that the community associated with this church wants to move somewhere else, even if it's very vulnerable. So this type of decisions is really based on the community and its resources. But I mean, just moving a place, well, moving a place would help the building resilience and also the stakeholder resilience, and help them to be effective in post-disaster. But this is really a subjective choice.
Thank you. We have another one. So I moved through the question very fast. Sorry, because there are questions. We have Frank again. Yes. I am wondering if we have indigenous people who used the same region previously of colonization, and is there data on how they have moved away or managed over the course of disasters? Did they already know that the certain areas would always be flooded? And did they, for example, relocate sacred sites elsewhere? What can we learn from the First Nations traditional history? So the main point is the last question.
Well, what can we learn? Well, we should learn to move somewhere else. Well, you know, I would say that indigenous worldview is definitely very different from Western worldview, and the relationship with the environment and the relationship with the land and the relationship with let's say with the territory. So what can we learn? Well, what we should learn is that they really embody a different worldview that somehow teaches us this connection with the environment, and also teaches us our inherent vulnerability. And this was also addressed somehow in this research, because our approach is to try to mitigate, to find a balance, instead of using hard tools to be a stronghold, which eventually is not effective in disasters.
I'd like to chip in here. So if you look at the website for the toolkit and such, it is actually for people who are non-technical. So anybody that is related, interested in that building can answer those questions to understand how vulnerable the structure is. Sometimes they are not. Some of them are not vulnerable, or some of them are not susceptible to disasters. You know, it's like the location can be different, or the structure can be built in a way that it is not going to be affected by what we think it is going to be affected by. So there are ways to look at that. And that was the reason for us to understand what may go wrong and to strengthen the structure based on that, or to take precautions based on that. Some of them, for example, the analysis that we did in the Knesset, right, Angela? It was like another flood happened, another hurricane happened, and the parts that we designated as vulnerable, actually it failed from there. So it is, these are really giving us the idea of what may go wrong in the structure. So if that happens, then you involve the professional parties that can solve that problem. So if there is nothing wrong with the structures, you don't have to do anything about it. But if there is something wrong, then you get a team of engineers and people who can strengthen that by keeping the originality of the structure at the same time. So I hope this information will be helpful. That workshop will, that toolkit will be helpful in that website, because that was the whole point of doing it, to give a tool to our people.
So, and let me add another another note, because I believe that I did not answer to the question about the First Nation. From this standpoint, Texas is not a good reference looking at indigenous culture, because indigenous culture were deeply displaced throughout Western history. So they were displaced to Oklahoma, and other indigenous communities were actually integrated during Spanish colonial time into larger Hispanized community. So right now there is a process of rediscovery the indigenous identity in Texas. I am a little involved in that, because I'm trying to understand what was the traditional indigenous knowledge and also worshipping that has been integrated in the Hispanized cultures. So we do not really have in Texas large community that are associated with the First Nations, and because unfortunately history somehow is unfair, right? So
so we have another one, maybe the last one, because we are running out of time. So in which ways, Ali Khamis, and okay, I thought that was a question. In which ways does the traditional buildings techniques could be used as benchmarks in enhancing resilience of the tangible and intangible cultural values? I'm kind of saying one, but
Saadet.
I am looking at it right now.
I can tell you the intangible.
I'm trying to look at the tangible ones in the presentation. I'm going over there. You start with the intangible.
Okay, so that's another aspect. As I said, I am originally from Italy, and I bring with me my culture. Also, Saadet is originally from Turkey. And in our countries, there is still a very high level of knowledge from masons and artisans about traditional techniques. And so, for example, when we speak about load-bearing masonry, or when we speak about carpentry, or we speak about wood making, there is still the knowledge of traditional craftsmanship that sometimes is not really valued a lot, because it's mostly handworks. So when we move to Texas and in general to the US, we have this loss of tradition. There is a detachment from the traditional building practices. And so I think that the fact that, there are buildings that remind us ancient or old construction practices force us to force, in general, the community to create skilled artisans that can address these type of problems. And so there are numerous initiatives all over Texas to support the craftsmanship. However, the problem is that when we have to repair these buildings, and or when we have to repair historic buildings in general, the cost is very high. And this is a concern of the stakeholders of these communities. Historic preservation shouldn't have such high cost, should be accessible to everybody or at the same level of new buildings, because there is not only the tangible aspect, but there is this aspect associated with the craftsmanship knowledge that doesn't have to get lost. So
when we look at the tangible aspect, of course, you look at the buildings, and then, like Angela said, it is expensive, right? Because you cannot do the things that you would do in a normal building, in a traditional building, or in a historical building. Why is that? Because now we look at the codes. So they have to be accessible. You know, you have that door, which is like 2 feet, and now you have to have it like 3 feet. This means you will have to demolish the wall, you know, in the most practical sense, right? So we have to make these buildings because they're still open to community, and you have to make sure that it is accessible for everybody. So what it involves is a big deal of study on it, right? For example, like Angela said, when I go to an ancient site in Turkey, I see that the mosaics, it's like, it takes a lot of effort to unearth them, right? So it takes decades of studies. And then what do? You cannot walk on it. Then now you have to create a glass floor, so to keep it like protected, but also exhibited, right? So these are the things that make it hard, but also at the same time beautiful. So what we are trying to do here is to make sure that even though these buildings are old, we're trying to protect them as much as we can, protect their identity as much as we can, but also we're taking it in context and making them compatible with the life today. So that is the thing. Like there are a lot of resources about historical buildings, but you cannot take one and apply it to all, because every structure is unique here. You change one thing, you change the location, you change the material, and you have a totally different case in your hands. But again, the main point is, I believe, to work with the professionals and to not leave it to, you know, any architect or any engineer that has been working on the modern structures. Not to say that it is bad, but it has to be somebody, it has to be a team of people who are experts on these structures, because they require a certain touch and a certain understanding.
Well, to conclude, because I think that we are above our time, I always say, maybe is that all the buildings are like old people. So they have, therefore, there is a higher vulnerability. They are more fragile. However, they have embedded an incredible knowledge and incredible wisdom. And I think that not only the professionals, but the community needs to see, to be able to recognize the significance of this building. And once we recognize them, probably we will start having a higher care, learning how to make them more resilient without really changing their intrinsic characteristics, right? So not to perform treatments that are against their physical nature, a little bit like taking care or giving prescription to older people. You cannot give older people very strong medication that you can have, you know, incredible side effects, and then you kill the person because the medication was too strong. And I think that thinking of ancient building and ancient site like older people that bring wisdom, tradition, and knowledge to us, maybe that's this is the way I look at that. And so I advise everybody to think of them in the same way.
Exactly. Thank you very much. And I don't see any questions, seeing none. Okay, thank you, Dr. Lombardi. Thank you, Dr. Beeson. That was a comprehensive research and very interesting presentation. And thank you for participating in this session. And thank you, Heritage Ottawa, for as our first partners. And thank you, Dr. Janito. Thank you, Fergus, and Dr. Askari as a director.
Thank you to you. Thank you to you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Francesco, we are getting back to you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Kurush, for inviting us. We were very pleased about your invitation, and we look forward for further collaboration. I think that the area where you are is extremely interesting, and this initiative is really invaluable. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you.
so much. Thank you both for that great presentation. It was very interesting and very informative. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Atarian, as well, for moderating today's session, and thank you to everybody in the audience for taking the time to be here and participate and ask questions. Just as a quick reminder, this is a monthly series, the first Monday of every month. And so we do have one more session left this year, which will be on Monday, December 2nd, with Dr. Candice Bogdansky. So if that is of interest to you, please mark that on your calendar, and please feel free to share the series with your networks and anyone who might be interested, as registrations are always open and free. And then just as one other reminder, the session today has been recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel and on the event page in just a couple of hours. So if anybody would like to go back and reference it or share it, please feel free to do so as well. And so with that, just one last big thank you to everybody. It was a great session. Thank you so much.